It's so nice. I don't know if you could hear the gong. This Obutsudan is a very, very high quality Obutsudan. Everything is handmade. And for those that are interested in Japanese woodworking, there's not one nail in this. Is all wood joisted together. And one of the things that you can tell about how the quality and the workmanship is that when the gong rings, it just continues on, and it has this beautiful tone. And so for those that might be interested, is like when we have these tones for the gong, everything is originally in Japanese Buddhism. There were 5 classic tones considered in Chinese classical music. There are 5 perfect pitches, is what they called it. And so everything that all the gongs that we have, supposedly the chants that we're chanting, are all within these perfect pitches, and that goes back to the idea of the perfect harmony. I was very fortunate that when I was at the Institute of Buddhist Studies, I was there at a time when I got to work with some people that were at the end of their career. And one was Reverend Kusada, a very wonderful man, born and raised. He was actually given to the temple like Shinran when he was a child. I think he was about 10 years old when he moved in the temple. And so he lived in pre-war Japan. And so he would do the pitches, but there was a creek by Mount Hiei where Shinran studied. And he would actually sit by the creek and try to imitate the pitch. That's how beautiful the tradition is. And so whenever you hear, I hope next time you hear the gong, whether it's at Ekoji or in some other service, whether it's another form of Buddhism, usually they try to have one of these 5 perfect pitches from Chinese culture. So I'm sorry I jumped the gun on my Dharma talk. It is a little disorienting. I was telling Andrea that my computer is usually on the opposite side of the corner. So I'm stuck in this corner. When I was talking to Andrea setting up, I unplugged. So I went dead. So it's a little awkward. So this is our first time, and so you'll understand why I get a little flustered with the order of service. But what I started off with was a reading by Dr. Jeff Wilson. I think many of you are familiar with him. I know that he has spoken at Ekoji at least once. I know he's spoken here at New York Buddhist Church at least once. And he's a Buddhist scholar that is also a practicing Shin Buddhist. And I believe he has received Tokudo, I believe, at this point. He's been ordained. And so when I was at Fresno many years ago, my first assignment, he had published a book that was called The Buddhism of the Heart. And it's a very straightforward book, and what it is his own reflections. So each chapter is only about 1.5 pages, and what I read you was the one chapter that he had on being mindful. And I like the book because it was, as we're doing tonight, we'll have a discussion. We'll start with a talk or a lecture or a Dharma talk, and then we'll go into discussion, and his material was very easy to do that with. And I like the idea that he's talking about that, we're going into the room, it's kind of dark, and we're bumping into things, and like I probably was yelling at the computer cord when I unplugged it. Everything is always external, it's always not us. And he explained that in a very calm way. And today with the talk on mindfulness, I would like us to kind of reflect upon, in a Buddhistic way, of us trying not to be external all the time, not to focus on what's going on outside, but through mindful practice to understand that we are responsible for a lot of our interaction with what goes on in our life. In Buddhism, one of the reasons I genuinely appreciate it is that it's an internal focused religion. It's contemplative. And so instead of focusing that, you're going to go to hell, or you're doing this, or you're doing this to me, it's like, this person is upsetting me. Why is this person upsetting me? What is my personal issues that makes me upset with this person? So this idea of being mindful, to focus on the material that's in front of you, and to try to work through it in a way that you try to see things as they truly are. Being a minister, you do some interesting things. This morning at 7:30, I was doing a discussion on Buddhism for the Rotary Club in Virginia, and they asked some very good questions about the intention of Buddhism and the idea of mindful practice, because mindful practice has become very secular. You can go to the magazine shop and there's magazines on mindfulness. You can go take classes on it. You can actually get college credit on mindfulness. But one of the things is a lot of us that have been Buddhists before this current interest in mindfulness is like, hey, they took one of our ideas and they've secularized, and they're making money off of it. And I think the idea that I would like for us to think about tonight as fellow Buddhists is that when we talk about mindfulness, it's not just only the concentration or the meditative part, but it's also the way that we direct our mind. I think one of the things, we don't talk about it in Shin Buddhism as much, but other schools of Buddhism and the historical Buddha talked about are the way that we use our mind, the way that we utilize how we view the world. And for example, when we talk about the Eightfold Path, it says right view, right effort, right job. And I've been in groups, actually I was in a class at the Institute of Buddhist Studies with a Theravada monk teaching the class. And we got a few students that were furious with Bhante. It's like, how dare you say, what is a right job? Who are you to tell me what a right job is? Who are you, very American, right? How dare you tell me what a right view is? And Bhante says, no, you don't understand. When we say right, we mean correct. Correct not as in good or bad, it means in a Buddhistic way, in a clear, unobstructed way. So when we look at the Eightfold Path, when I talk to the Dharma School kids, I try to always emphasize that we're not talking about morals. It's not a good thing. It's not right as opposed to wrong. What it is that it's trying to help us refocus on these aspects through a Buddhist perspective. Again, in other schools of Buddhism, and I do encourage us to read other schools of Buddhism's information, I have been getting some very interesting correspondence from people from the Ekoji webpage, and they've been asking, have you ever been interested in other forms of Buddhism? What do you think about self-power, other power? And they ask very elaborate questions. And the thing that I want to emphasize, again, is that when we talk about Buddhism, it's not, we are Shin Buddhists, so we try to focus our practices and our ritual on Shin Buddhism, but also that does not mean that we have to exclude other types of practice. And so when we talk about mindful practice, there are very explicit ways that are written down how to follow mindful practice. Also, there are ways for us to go into analyzing our thoughts. So in the future, I might bring up some books that maybe aren't necessarily Jodo Shinshu related, because I'd like us to open up how we look at things. I had a wonderful talk I have here at the New York Buddhist Temple, I have 3 ministers' assistants that have Tokudo, have all been ordained, and actually one of them is a retired librarian so this information warehouse, it's wonderful to talk to him. And for us that, we're so focused on Shin Buddhism and we talk about Shinran, but when you look at how Shinran differed from his master, Honen Shonin, it really enriches how we understand what Shinran, how he changed the views of Shin Buddhism. So during these sessions, even though we are going to be doing Shin ritual, I will be bringing up some other perspectives that maybe are not, how would I say, not unorthodox, but more inclusive of other schools of Buddhism. So getting back to this idea of being mindful practice, I'm very human. I can get very excited. I can get very frustrated with other people. And I remember I had a good friend at Seattle, and Joe, don't worry about figuring out who this person is. This person has been going to temple for many, many years. But it was wonderful because I started going to the Seattle temple and I befriended this woman, and long and behold, I found out that she lived in the same apartment building that I did. So then we became Dharma buddies, and so what we would do is we would go to temple together, and then what was the fun part is that Seattle has dozens of wonderful breakfast weird little restaurants, and so then we would go out and have breakfast, and we would have this talk about what the discussion was in the sermon, or the discussion of the Dharma talk that day. But the one thing that was frustrating for me is that she was my good friend, and we were both very active in the temple, but she liked to monku or kvetch about her job, and so she was an administrative assistant. And so we would every week go out for breakfast, and the conversation after we got booted out, after we got tired of talking about the Dharma, we'd start talking about our daily lives. And my friend would start inevitably like, well, that I helped this person on this project, but they took credit for it. Well, I understand, but you're an administrative assistant. That's your job. And so every week, and I was getting really frustrated, and I think maybe because we were both going to the temple, I didn't want to just like get frustrated with her and say, why are you keep complaining about your job, that you're complaining about what your job is? And so then I thought about it, and I actually did consult Reverend Castro, and the idea was like turning the idea around, looking at it from a Buddhistic perspective. So what it was is just, I was getting frustrated because she was telling me the same thing every week, complaining about what her job duties were. But what it was is that when I looked at it from a Buddhist perspective, is that she needed to express that. And so what I needed to do is I needed to help her express that, but in a way that maybe was a little more productive. And so I said to her, so I had this meeting, all these ideas in my head, and so we had breakfast, and the inevitable conversation came up about her job. And I looked at her, and we'll call her Susan, and that's not her name. I'll say, Susan, I really like to support you, and talk about looking for different opportunities and new careers, but I don't think it's healthy for you to be focusing on just the negative aspects of your job. Well, we didn't have breakfast the next week because she was really mad at me. And so I thought that I handled it fairly well, and evidently I did to a certain extent, because then, we talked about it the following week. And she said, she thought about it, and again, focusing, as Dr. Wilson said in the beginning in my quotation, is focusing on the other. It's like, why is that person taking responsibility for my work? Why are they getting all the credit when I am not? And then, I said to Susan, I said, well, the idea is like, maybe you need to get a job where you get credit for what you do, because you are very talented at what you do. And so I was proud of myself. So I think this is a really concrete example about when we talk about looking at life situations and difficulties and conflicts, is that we try to think about Buddhism as being our prism to look through it at. And so again, I think our instant response is stupid computer, it unplugged itself. Why did I have to drag the computer across the room? You could go down that path. Or my friend Susan could continue going on about how unhappy she was with her job. And in fact, she did find another job and was much happier. And we had much better breakfast after that too, because she was happy. But again, when we talk about mindfulness, I like us to think as fellow Buddhists, not only as in the practice of like concentrating and being present where you are, but also thinking about how can I view things from a healthier Buddhistic perspective. Looking at my friend, knowing that she's frustrated, and trying to figure out a way for her to work through that through compassion and through genuinely listening to her. So as I've mentioned, in other schools of Buddhism, they will give people, they'll give fellow, not monks and nuns, but the lay people very explicit rules about what you follow, how to create this mindful practice, and how to focus on the Dharma. So today, with our very first session, I want to thank you and for joining me. And I hope that when we have these difficult situations, because the Buddha, that's the whole point of why he decided to teach the Dharma, or what we call the Buddhist teachings, is that, as you know from the beginning Buddhist class that I taught and from other classes, is that when he came out of his samadhi, out of his enlightenment, he thought, can I share this with people? Do I need to do this? And it was the encouragement of the people that he had practiced with before that says, you need to share this. And so he said that this is our cure for our suffering. And when he says suffering, it's a lot of times he's talking about our psychological and our emotional suffering. The idea that we make ourselves sick because we're so worried, unhappy with our job. So in the idea of Shakyamuni Buddha, that let's try to be mindful about what we're doing, but also thinking about that the Dharma is a wonderful tool and a wonderful medicine, as we've often heard about Shakyamuni Buddha, is that he was the doctor for our ills, the medicine to help us with our emotional difficulties. Okay, so I would like to conclude with Dr. Wilson's writings again, so if you could please join me in Gasho. In our normal technical difficulties. Okay. In our normal unenlightened experience, we go through life as if stumbling around in a dark room. We bump into the table and cry out, "Stupid thing, who put that there?" We then knock over the lap. Ugh, somebody should have bolted that thing down. Failing about, we crash into an ottoman. What an idiotic place for a footstool. Unawakened, we continually encountered unseen difficulties, and compounding our problems, we then encounter such difficulties, we curse and blame all those things on others. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. So what I'd like to do to conclude before we go into the discussion group, I'd like us to read the three treasures together, so if you could please join me. So this is Three Treasures, number 1 on page 8. Hard is it to be born into human life, now we are living it. Difficult is it to hear the teachings of the Blessed One, now we hear it. If we do not realize the truth in this life, when will it be realized? Let us reverently take refuge in the three treasures of the truth. I take refuge in the Buddha. May we absorb ourselves in the principle of the way to enlightenment and awaken in ourselves the supreme will. I take refuge in the Dharma. May we be submerged in the depths of the doctrine and gain wisdom as deep as the ocean. I take refuge in the Sangha. May we live in harmony in the great assembly as disciples of Buddha and be freed from all hindrances, become units of true accord in the life of harmony and a spirit of universal oneness, freed from the bondage of selfishness. Even through myriad ages of kalpa, as hard is it to hear such an excellent, profound, and wonderful doctrine. Now we are able to hear and receive it. Let us thoroughly understand the true meaning of the Tathagata's teachings. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.